Hello, hello. Welcome to another episode of Restore the Real. This is Dr. Randy Michaux, and today I've got a really just wonderful, beautiful guest on. And I first heard her talk in ECO 2022, and I was getting ready to get on stage after her. And after listening to her, it was like, I want to hear more of what she has to say, not what I have to say. Her name is Dr. Kathy Yao. And I've heard her speak twice now at ECO. And of all the speakers, she's been the most grounded speaker there, where I really felt like she could just stand in one spot on the stage, not move at all, and everyone would be captivated because of just the wisdom that you impart. And I really love following your Instagram, the things that you share. It's meant a lot to me and really helped me kind of evolve into who I am. So, Dr. Kathy Yao, welcome, and thank you for being on.
It's my honor. Thank you so much for your invitation.
Absolutely. So, before we get into things, could you give our audience a little background into you? How did you get into this space, and why is this so important to you?
I think life happens, so it's kind of difficult to say where it started, how it all started, because I could even say it might have started from our ancestors and just so forth. I was born and raised in South Korea, and I had two very strong female figures in my life. My mother's side, they were all doctors and scholars. And my father's side, they were herbalists and acupuncturists. So both the Western, the Eastern side. So it was quite diverse. But I would have to say my mother, she was a classical musician. And then her mother, my grandmother, was first female medical doctor in Korea. So she went through two major wars, which was World War II was Japanese and Korean War. And I think her storytelling really influenced and shaped me and really grounded me what it means to be a doctor. And from that vision, I knew that not necessarily that I wanted to be a doctor, but I think I had my own definition of healing arts, medicine, and doctor. And then I came to United States when I was 14 years old and kind of had to relearn everything. The language, yes, and I think language is a very interesting thing. When we think about language and words, often it's rather reduced in one culture. When you see Italians communicating, they really use their body language, and there's this musicality. When you see the way basketball players communicate as a team, it's not just the talking, but it's, they thump and hug, and there's so much of that expression that had to be reduced to a very sophisticated, logic-based in Western in doctrine language. And I needed to learn in order for me to feel accepted and proficient, and so people could kind of trust that that I was a proficient in what I did. And I think that didn't really satisfy me, even though it was a wonderful challenge. And then I feel like chiropractic really called me. Originally, I was planning on to medical school, and it didn't last very long. And so I feel like chiropractic school really found me. And then from there, you learn that structural health and nutritional health goes hands in hand. And there are a lot of things happen personally in my life as well as my clinical setting. And you just begin to expand your perspective, especially with our relationship with nature and God and one another. And I found myself actually returning back to my Eastern origin. So it's really a beautiful circle. And I think that's sort of where I am today.
That's so cool. Thanks for sharing that. I find it so fascinating that when I asked the question, like, what got you into this? And you're like, well, it may have been my ancestors, right? Because they have such an influence on us, even if we've never met them. They're embedded in our DNA, right? And their wisdom, their challenges, their trials, it's embedded, and it does inform and influence who we are, what we do, how we view things. And so I really find that just beautiful and fascinating that you went there. You also mentioned that your grandma would tell you stories. I'm really the way that she communicated with you. And there's a lot of things that you said that I want to unpack, but I'm really curious, like what things stood out to you that your mother, not grandmother, grandmother, sorry.
My grandmother was the
Okay, okay,
doctor. My mother was pianist. She was a musician.
okay. So like, how did these stories, what, maybe what were some of them about, and how did that move you?
Mm. I think for the sake of this conversation, and especially for our audience to understand the value of storytelling, I would like to relate that. So the way storytelling is one of the most profound way for us to relate to one another. We are taught to, when we take a soap exam, we are taught to make a checklist, quantifiable values and biomarkers, and this is how we define health. But what truly moves us and resonates us from the core, whether that is a doctor to a patient relationship, or someone who is in really dark place in their lives or with challenges, and then hearing someone else sharing those stories and simply just actually making that deep connection is by far the most fundamental part of healing process. And my grandmother, who went through two major wars, if I could relate to right now, sort of the movement that we're going from the integrative and functional medicine to quantum medicine, or if you want to call it, there are many different names, but this quantum field, the way Western culture, functional medicine, different circles, people are starting to sort of wake up and understand that there's something beyond within our physical realm when it comes to healing and understanding life. So this is a wonderful emerging moment, and it circles back to how invincible and powerful we are as human. At the same time, how insignificant we are. Those two things very much exist in science, especially in quantum field. In Zelcore, in my last presentation, I talked about Brownian motion, how Einstein was able to see this oscillation on some molecule level. So for example, if I am talking about a glass of my dining table, it'd be one thing for me to say this liquid, this water is waves. But if for me to say this solid object is waves, people will usually think that I'm crazy. No, that's solid, right? But on a quantum level, on a smaller scale, they are waves. And we see this behavior in graphene. We see this in electrons, not just photons. They have this particle, the waves, they have this duality that happens. And it all depends how we apply it. On an earth level, on a very practical, realistic clinical setting, maybe it is important that we take that logical pathway and say, okay, this is solid, this is liquid. But there are times, just like Einstein, if he could take that pure curiosity and follow the answer to his questions and be able to reimagine something that is beyond on a human scale, with his intuition on a quantum level, you begin to see waves. And I think that's what art is. How do you rationalize quality art versus not so quality? And it's the same thing with the science, because they're married. So this duality of life, that one human being, we could accomplish, nothing is impossible. At the same time, just like ants and insects, just one day, it's just not a lucky day. You get stepped on and you're gone. There's no guarantee that we'll be here. And I think this very much applies to in our clinical setting as well. So this was very much witnessed during her wartime, that she would really focus on what's truly important and necessary, not only to survive, but what motivates her to survive, because she was a mother, because of her sense of purpose. But at the same time, just being in the wrong place in wrong time, she would see people getting shot. And this is something, you're in that critical moment. And I think going back to that ancestor, it is such a privilege to be where we are. It is because what they've witnessed and what they've experienced and how the paved the way for us to exist. So I think these stories really resonated with me, not just in this inspiring way, but the way I would actually apply in a clinical setting.
I think it's amazing. And that duality of things, my wife and I were in this ongoing discussion about things in our faith culture, and how many often want to have, like, this thing means this. Well, but it could also mean this. And when we start to unpack that and say, no, for many, it's like, no, I want black or white. But the gray is where the discovery is found. The gray is where, like, we see the beauty of things, because each of us have something different to give. And without that, I mean, life would be boring if it was just one way. And so I also, when you talk about these stories that your grandma told, I often think that people, they learn so much about their ancestors once they've passed. And there has to be this vulnerability that we're willing to share and open. And one thing that you said she imparted to you was not just what she was experiencing, but what kept her going, and that motivation. And so many times we're afraid to share what it is that we love the most, what we desire, what our real intent motivation is, because, well, what if someone rejects that, or what if someone doesn't like that? But that is like, that's life. That motivation is what makes each of us tick. And so I kind of want to go there, because as I followed your podcast, no, sorry, your Instagram, one of the things that you come back to often is, why do you even want to be healthy? Right? This has kind of been a recurring theme. And I don't think people really have that defined. They know what they don't want, but why do you focus? And I have my own thoughts on that, but I want to turn that over to you. Why for you is that, like, one of these foundational things that you really have clarity on? What do you want?
I love this question that you're asking, and I feel very heart-centered. I was very looking forward to connecting with you, and I just want to acknowledge it often, which I don't do very often at conferences and podcasts. But I felt like even when you first approached me the first time we met, it wasn't so much about the topic. It was very apparent to me that it was so heart-centered. And those are the things that really nourishes me, that keeps me going as a practitioner, then kind of going into the grief of where the humanity is going. So I just, first and foremost, I really want to thank you and really appreciate these heart-centered and authentic questions that you're asking, because it's not so much about what are the protocols and the studies, and those things are important and they play their role, but it's so heart-centered and I love it. I think it's a wonderful question, and I am going to kind of go reverse. I think the most difficult thing in life are the simplest things. When I talk to practitioners, and I don't want it to sound negative, but for example, like even a cell core, for example, if you remember, we're really big on parasites cleanse. And if you remember, maybe there were 2, 3, maybe maximum 5 out of hundreds of practitioners who could identify the herbs that I presented that were in para products. So we see clinical nutritionists who understand the medical properties and active ingredients, but they don't cook or they don't know where the foods come from. Literally a few weeks ago, ironically, I spoke to he's not a teenager yet, but he's like probably 10, 9. And I don't know if he was joking. I'm hoping he's joking, but he told me that walnuts grow in a grocery store.
It might not
You
have been. You never know.
And this is more of sort of the dramatic example, but sometimes we really forget where things come from and where things go. So the origin. And a lot of times I think in this modern world, we try to solve problems horizontally. I think it's so important to learn vertically from the up.
Yep.
Uh, Otherwise, you are just end up with sound bites, molecules, particles, mitochondria, and empowerment is knowing how to read ingredients. Then we don't really touch and smell the produce and connect, and these things have been lost. So it's so important to master the basics, and then you realize the immune system is self-regulating. Universe is self-organizing, so you just kind of have to let life be, right? And I think that's why we kind of overcomplicate things. So it's the same question with health. Why do you want to be healthy? And I teach a course called The Healer Within, and it's teaching for people how to be human before trying to be a health practitioner. And it's the very first question that I ask. And for me, I call this a lighthouse. And I want everybody to write down what their lighthouse is. When things get tough and when you want to cheat and cut corners and you're overwhelmed, what is your lighthouse? Often it's their loved ones, or if it doesn't even have to be a person or thing, but it's the vision, the goal that they have. We know that 90% of neurological signals come from the heart to the brain. We don't need the studies to do that. All we have to do is, like Einstein said, read children's book, and it will tell you to listen to your heart. Poets and artists, they almost knew the wider truth. And our job is to kind of bring it more on a physical level. So it's so important to know what is the reason for your heart to want to beat. And that is one of major biomarkers for these people. One of the studies of blue zone people that gives them the vitality and longevity. They have a reason, because if we try to understand the meaning and the why and the purpose of why we're going to live with science, there's not even single science that could rationalize it, because the fact is that we're all going to die. So what is the purpose of living and wanting to be healthy when you know the end? And the only ways that we could rationalize this, I think there's actually a book called Selfish Genes. It's the genetics that keeps going. But and exactly what you said is the most fundamental reason for the trouble for people is the boredom. We want some aesthetics. We want to go deeper. There's a curiosity. I think that's what keeps life going. But if we try to just take the logical scientific pathway, there is no reason that we want to be healthy, because we know the end story. Does that make sense?
Oh, it does.
Yeah. So I think for me, it's always going back to the essence. Take all the sort of superficial layers off and go to the very core and essence of who you are. And now the science is finally catching up that it is hard. And what is the reason that you want to be healthy? Wanting to be healthy is not a good reason.
No, it's there's something that my boys and me last week, we went on a mountain climbing trip, and I asked my 15-year-old, I'm like, what was the best part? I mean, there was a lot of cool stuff. We got to climb, we got to the peak of the Grand Teton, and I said, what was your favorite part? And he said, I think when I was just sitting on the rock, looking out at and he didn't use the word expanse, but he said I was just enjoying like all of this around me. And I said, would a good word be for that just experiencing love? And he kind of looked at me like, yeah, I guess so. And I think that when we get to the heart of it, no pun intended, that it really does come down to we are beings that want to love and we want to be loved. And that if we can identify like what it is that we truly love in life, that gives so much meaning and so much purpose that it influences everything that we do. And if there's any other motivation, my personal belief is it's fleeting. It's not going to be lasting because love doesn't fail. Charity, we're told in the Bible, we're told in scripture, charity never faileth. And I really believe if people get down to what is it that you love, and I think that means knowing that this life isn't an ending point. It also wasn't the beginning point, that there's been this expanse and we're like this tiny dot in this spectrum of eternity, that it really does come down to the love. That's my personal belief on things. So
Yeah, for sure. What you just described was very Zen. It's so aligned with the Eastern culture, and not to separate East from the West or even North to South. It's all different language, and I think it's all the same thing from different angles and different experiences. So I'm all about diversifying and embracing it all. But as you were saying this with your son and the way you're describing even the dot and the end and the beginning and the end, for Eastern culture, as I said, we know that health is not linear. When we talk about sort of this mechanic idea of health, it's very linear. We like things calculated and fit in like those. And you look around this vision that I have of your son just kind of absorbing on and it just all in and just being so present, you realize nothing in nature is linear. And so for us, I practice a lot of meditative art like Korean calligraphy. And it's all about the circles, right? Cycles and rhythms in life, whether we're looking at circadian rhythm, lunar cycles. I mean, there are infinite cycles and rhythms. And that's basically what love is that as you follow, it's no longer vertical, horizontal, it's actually circular. So there is no beginning nor the end. And that's basically what love is. And that's how, when we look at Big Bang Theory, that's how we understand universal principle shows that it's self-organizing.
mhm.
And that's how our immune system is self-regulating. uh, the wisdom is there, and the spec, this idea of spec that you even talk about, it's just amazing. In Genesis, it's just talked about this formless, all God spoke life. And from art or from scientific point of view, it starts with that, literally the speck, that one dot. And that dot just kind of stirred up everything. Now we have a thunderstorm. Now, it's a really an amazing thing. So in a sense, everything that has materialized, the food that we eat, the plants that grow, it all came from nothing. It came from nothingness. And then there was a voice, there was a word, there was intention, there was love. And then it materialized what energizes us today.
And I love that because it gives us this example of the creative process, right? That we're creating every day, whether people realize that or not. It's like this creation wasn't just an event that took place however long ago. It's like, no, this is continual. This creation is happening every day, every moment, because we get to create, we get to participate in that process. And you talked about, that God spoke life into it. This idea of communication. And there's so many different levels of communication, and who we communicate with and what we communicate with and how we communicate that. And when you first, were introducing yourself and you talked about language, how important our words and the way that we communicate, they're like, that's everything. I think that really, you can tell a lot by a person by listening to the words they say. And we did a thing in our church group last week where I get to teach younger kids, 12 and 13-year-olds. And I asked them, I said, fill in the blank. life is what? And I was a little saddened by the responses. Hard, a grind, difficult, challenging, which it is all those, but nobody of the 12 kids said, life is beautiful, life is a gift. And then at the end of our discussion that we had, I said, okay, I want to go back. And as we've discussed things and as you felt stuff, life is what? And like their whole body language changed, their facial expression changed, and many of them were like, life is really beautiful, and life is a gift, and life is, curiosity, and life is, and I'm like, this is so cool. I didn't know what I was going to get, if it was going to be the same answers. But can you speak to that communication? And it's not just us to others or us to God, but it's also these things to us, back to us.
I think that's my own biggest challenge, because as you
What do you
say,
mean?
communication skill, because this is an example. For example, being Korean during World War II, when we were colonized by Japanese, and this is very embedded in it's like Jewish with the Nazi and Turks and the Armenian. There is quite a bit of grief. I think it's embedded in our DNA. You see it a lot in our music and art. You could see this in all different historical events. So being Korean American and being born, this is taught in school. And the very first thing, of course, there were many cruel things that happen all throughout humanity. Even Christians, in the name of God, we've misinterpreted and communicate God's message. Yeah, in our history, the very first thing I think that people were really affected were they took away the language, that we couldn't speak Korean, and we had to change our name. And there is something, and we see this in our clinical setting, where every day we come up with new diagnoses and names, right? One day it's I don't know, bone broth, and the next day is keto, and next thing it's mitochondria. It's not microbiome, and next thing you have a cellular inflammation. And I see my patients starting to embody their diagnosis. Embody. It's not even I have Hashimoto, I am Hashimoto.
Right.
It's a very dangerous thing. So language is really, as you say, it's a thought pattern. We know the difference between acute inflammation, this typical rubor tumor, this hot swelling when you have a car accident, for example, or have a sprained ankle, an acute inflammatory process. Whereas when you go through chronic inflammation, what happens is the cells become distorted. Distorted cells have wrong communication. So when we're looking at chronic inflammation, it's not even so much of the chronic inflammatory state. That's no longer people are speaking the same language anymore, or they're playing classical music and while the other person is playing rock and roll or heavy metals. So there's no longer self-organizing state for body to regulate. So I think language is something that we really need to study. As you said, every single word, we have to make sure that we mean what we truly mean to say. And there are certain words that just simply I cannot translate from Korean to English. And same with my another language that I speak quite a bit is Spanish. It's very different. So I think that was my biggest struggle. Same thing with from literature to scientific language. Is that really the inflammation, or is that just simply because the person is stagnant? They're sedated, and there needs to be some nourishment and stimulation. So I think communication is definitely the key. But how we communicate, I do believe it is not by filling it with words. I think true communication, and I really am rediscovering this is silence. I
It
think,
really, I had a coach that he would often say, there's three forms of communication, and it's verbal, it's your tone, and then your body language, and that is the majority of it. Just being able to see a person, see the person in front of us without them saying anything, and just I'm I'm really trying to more appreciate the journey of a soul, regardless of where they are in life. And sometimes that's challenging because there's judgment, and like immediately you want to be like, oh, well, they probably, it's like, no, no, you have no clue what's going on there. And and as I've gotten to know people that I normally wouldn't in the past have associated with, it's like, wow, your story is so sometimes heart-wrenching and beautiful, and coming to a place where everything that's happened to you was meant to happen, and you're here, and this is where it's brought you to, and look at these opportunities you have. And I feel that a lot of people, they don't appreciate their experiences, and not that we want to relive certain things in our past, but the importance that they had to really bring us to where we are. And does that make sense?
yes,
And
I believe so, because we are sort of listening, holding that space, right?
yeah,
Listening to their experience is, I think listening is sort of the most important part of communication. That's sort of what I'm hearing. It's
yeah,
kind of back to storytelling and listening. The practitioner, I think, is by far the most important thing. Is we feel very rushed. When I put myself as a patient position and go see a doctor, or even just like a customer service, and you feel that rushed already, it's just your autonomic nervous system breaks out. And I think one of the most important role that we could hold right now is the form of communication is um, holding space. So listening to those experiences and stories without a judgment.
I think what's interesting is when I work with people, one of the things that they comment on the most is, you let me talk. Like you're listening, you're hearing, you're not just, hearing words, but you're hearing intent, you're hearing pain, you're hearing, grief. And I think that's so important, that as humans, that we do allow ourselves to feel that, not that we need to carry it with us and become that, but that we feel that, to know and understand what someone else is going through. And I wanted to ask you, on in terms of like communication, what are things that you do to keep yourself grounded? I mean, I as I listen to things that you've put on Instagram and read different posts you've had, there's like this ongoing communication with nature, and how that impacts you. And I'd really love for you to share, what are things that you do to fill yourself with that, the words, the language of love within, to like cultivate that within, so that you're living in that frequency and that resonance, as opposed to, I guess, whatever comes. You're very intentional about what, where you are, what you do, what you allow into your life. How does that manifest? What does that look like?
I think living it is by far the most important thing. As I mentioned, I don't know what I am. Like there's part of me that is very Asian, and then there's very part of me that is also very Americanized, and then there's part of me that is very Spaniard, from different culture. And it is, as I said, it's a struggle, but it's a wonderful challenge that I feel actually very grateful that I could struggle to find the right word to make impact to my audience. But as far as truly unifying everyone from all different backgrounds, not just the nationality, but from science to art, especially, where art or spirituality, these are not very welcome terms in medicine, you know. So how can we bridge the gap? Same thing with the humanity to nature. So we have to think about what unifies us. Food is one of them, clean air, water, I'm really big on. But I think when it comes to communication, I believe it has to be, not has to be, but just looking at the imbalance, there's so much information, and what we need is a non-verbal force. As I said, silence. When someone is rather quiet and then they say one word, that becomes more profound. And we very much see this the way people dance, or the way people perform sports. It's not about how many goals and they make. It's about how disciplined they are to wait for the right moment, you know. So this silence and space is, I think, where the true meaning, or where truth is. So I think that's one way. And to find that right language that everybody understands, I do believe that's nature. Circadian rhythm is getting a lot of attention. As I said, there are many different rhythms and cycles in life, but light is also getting a lot of attention. But when we listen to, for example, when I live in the jungle, very first thing about 4 o'clock, I study sound there. The very first thing is woo, woo, woo. So there's communication between howl monkeys, and usually they're howling the same thing. It sounds like back and forth, back and forth. And when I ask one of the naturalists why they're communicating about their territory. This is our territory, don't come here. But they're constantly going back and forth. The reason they repeat is so they don't fight. They don't have a war. I thought that was so monumental.
Yeah,
you know, they want to make sure that they're being heard, you know, even though anything to master is repetition. So it starts with there, and then you start to hear the birds, different birds, and then the whole symphony begins. That's the beginning of the day. Same thing as the day ends. You start, depending on the season, but usually in the season that I'm in, going from the dry to wet season, rainy season, circadian. They're insects. It's like the base. The whole body vibrates, and toucans is one of my favorite sounds that I study. It's very, very melancholy. They're gathering people during the day, it's to find food, and then around afternoon sunset time, it's saying, let's go to bed. The only ones who do not abide by the cycle are us humans. We want to, myself included, but in the jungle, when you don't have a choice, when you don't have electricity, it's very simple. You are guided by nature. Nature still is the main director. And it's incredible what happens to your body. It's no longer digest system or hormonal system or musculoskeletal. It's no longer a system. It's the whole body heals and transforms. So I think spending time in nature and speaking the language of nature is what's going to make some major positive changes.
I find that silence there's a lot of fear in silence. Like, what happens if there's so much information that we have access to, and we're as kids are growing, developing, it's like, I look at my 3-year-old and, oh my gosh, she, swipe. If you give them, it's just kind of, it's embedded, starting to be embedded. What am I trying to say? That silence, though, can be scary for a lot. And that boredom, which I don't know if anyone really knows boredom until everything is stripped away and you've got nothing. And maybe that's actually simplicity, simple and beautiful. What do you say to the person that is fearful of that silence and fearful of not having this external stimulus that can distract? And the follow-up to that would be, why is it essential to break from that fear to dive into the silence?
I think it's different for each person. It's no different than dealing with addiction. I think technology is definitely a form of addiction.
Mhm.
Addiction by nature, I think it's just kind of cutting off or separating from the emotion. So whether the emotion is anxiety or anger or depression or any sort of stimulation, it's an addict. I think that's what addiction is. And I think when you spend enough time in nature, you see that waves never stay. Waves come and it splashes. Being a surfer is still very uncomfortable feeling, but when you know that it's not forever, it splashes, but it's going to go. And then now you could breathe. And that sort of visceral physical contact of gaining trust in nature is one way. So clearly, you could do this with your family when you take them in nature. Those people who are not familiar, I still have adult friends who are very afraid of spiders, where I live in a luxury 5-star hotel, they put flowers under your pillow. Where I live, they put scorpion under your pillow. So it's not always comfortable, but it's just all about perspective. So where you are and what you're used to, and just pushing that boundary, that tolerance. And I think it's the same. This is why science is very important. I think if you have to understand it intellectually so that you could be prepared, science is there that indeed space is not empty. It's filled with electromagnetic frequencies that connects us from the smallest particle to the universe. So you know that silence is really not silent. So whether some people need to experience that physically by just exposing them and spending a little bit of time, and you don't take them to the wilderness, you start with gardening a little bit and start to teach them whatever that excites them about in nature, because nature is so diverse. So it doesn't have to be extreme, whether it's a tree, whether it's fishing, it's water or mountains. I think just that element that is in our DNA. So whether it's your 3-year-old child, it just depends what she or he is interested in.
Yeah.
And I think once you find that, that curiosity is always going to be there. But for adults who are very used to that sort of metropolitan and technology-oriented world, then I think studies are very important. Know that it's harmful for you. How your body regulates is based on nature's biological rhythm. And then also being able to physically experience that little by little.
And I think that's really important, that it's not like all or nothing. Um,
No.
it is incremental, and you build, and just like it is this, you're creating, right? You're creating space within you for something new. You're creating space to have new experiences and new insight, and I think that recognizing that we are creating, that we get to create, is, I think, really so important, that we're not being acted on, that we are using our agency to act and to create, and we get to create something beautiful. And there's not like I find that a lot of people are like, yeah, but I could only do like this much. Have you ever done that before? Well, no, but it was only this much. Like, you've never done that before. That was massive. You went out and put your feet on the ground. You haven't done that in 7 years. Like, that was huge. It doesn't matter if it was for 30 seconds. And I think that comparison is dangerous. I feel that with the silence, that sometimes it's, again, this comparison. Did I do enough? Can I do enough? And it's like, it doesn't matter. You just create what you're creating, and you see where that goes. And as you talked about the waves, they come in and they come out. It doesn't last forever. These experiences come and they go, and they come and they go, and we just take what's given, and let it be. I think that is, there's so many things that I could unpack with what you're saying. Could talk forever, but I'm going to hold that off for maybe a different time, because that's a whole nother topic. Thinking of
Yeah,
water,
I love this conversation for sure.
um, I would like to expand on water, but again, I think that could take another hour, and so maybe at a different time we come back and talk about that. If you're willing, I would love to hear
Or,
your
of
perspective
course.
on that. One thing I think I'd like to kind of maybe end on is, you mentioned something in your eco talk, and you talked about how nature nourishes, and cleanses. And I think this is important, that this is not just from a product. And so many people are like, I imagine the people that are going to be listening are like, yeah, where's the protocol? Where's the magic, formula that's going to change it all? And it's like, it's not coming. Getting back into nature has been nature's been a part of my life for a long time. I don't think I've thought of it in the depths that I've heard you speak of it as, but innately, it's always been so important for me to be in the mountains. I've had some of my most beautiful experiences in the mountains, in silence, in my own head, not talking, not communicating with anybody except God and nature.
Oh my gosh. I'm like experiencing as you're saying, I'm visualizing.
And it's just that there have been so many cool things. And I guess I'll just share one and then I'll let you talk. When we were on the mountain this past week, the guides told us, they said, okay, you have to make a decision. Are you going to continue up to the summit because it's not getting any easier? It's going to be harder. We had 7.5 miles the first day with 5,800 feet of elevation gain. So I mean, that's almost 1,000 feet per mile, which was a lot. And as they said that, everyone was like, okay, how do my legs feel right now? How will they feel in the morning? And there was one gentleman that was in our group that he was he was in such deep thought. And I looked at him and it was just that communication, silence. He didn't say anything. I didn't say anything, didn't have to. I knew exactly what he was thinking. Should I continue? Should I try to summit? I have concerns. I was pushed really hard today. I don't know what will happen to my body tomorrow. And just in an instant, I sensed all of that. And it was like, man, that's such a gift. I love being able to see people. And then a little bit later, I went up to him and I said, I sense this. Would you like to pray together? Whatever that may be, however that may benefit you. And he's like, I appreciate the offer. Let me think about it. And he came back and he's like, if the offer's still there, I would love that. And so we went off, not far away, but it was just a neat opportunity for each other to heal in a sense. And because of where we were in nature, there was this nourishing and there was this cleansing that was happening simultaneously with both of us. It was such a gift to both of us. And he ultimately decided not to go. And he was totally at peace with that. Where I think I would have been like, oh my gosh, I'm not going to make it because this is what I wanted to do. And it's like, no, that doesn't matter. Appreciate what you've been able to do and love that. How do you find with the people that you work with this beautiful understanding that nature does nourish and cleanse in many different ways? And why is that so important that we understand that process and put ourselves in a position to experience that process?
So I think when I said nature nourishes and it cleanses or it decays, for example, tree is a perfect example. Its decaying process is a very natural process. Kind of going back to what we talked about, the origin of things and the circular, I think that kind of, and even the words that we use, certain words that we use in this sort of a functional medicine, integrative medicine circle is biohacking.
And you don't like that term.
Anti-aging.
Right.
And they are very welcome words. And I think it's something to really think about. So originally hacking means stealing. And that so we're extracting. So it's like ancient wisdom is the same thing. Going back to ancestor the most important part about ancient wisdom is how much they've sacrificed and how they live their lives. It's not about extracting those anti-parasitic herbs or using the plant medicine, you know, to hold eco-luxurious retreat. uh, you know, of course, there are premature aging that we often see with autoimmune diseases and that's when I would assume that anti-aging comes from. So aging is something that is very natural, but when you age too fast, of course, you want to reverse that. But sometimes, so I'm not so against the words themselves, but it's always about how people are using those words in the wrong, without understanding how that leads to, and what happens is you put yourself against nature, and that's never a good place to be. It's like me being in the wrong place waiting for the waves. Well, they're not going to come. I could be upset, I could be frustrated, I could have tantrum. Well, I'm not going to catch a wave unless I move where the waves are coming, or if I'm in the wrong spot, I'm going to lose. And I think that's something very important. So death is a very decaying, degenerating, is a very natural part. So when we talk about nourishing and cleansing, it's the cycle. The second eco presentation, I focus more on the metabolism. So how nourishment becomes nourishing is because of cleansing. So it's like they cannot exist without the other. Does it make sense? But when they become dis-ease or imbalance, is because we're nourishing too much by over consuming all the superfoods and all the supplements, or when we are over detoxifying, cleansing in the speed that the flow rate of the lymphatic system in our body cannot, you just can't. So it's actually the metabolic rate that we shouldn't cause wear and tear. And you could kind of look at this with cars too. You know, it could be 5-year-old car, or it could be 20-year-old car, but depending on the mileage or how often you drive. So it's not about just how much you're nourishing or how much you're detoxifying. Like alcoholism, you know that you can't detox too fast. It could actually cause more harm. So it's really more on the rate, the steadiness, rhythm, that rhythm that is synchronized with nature. And as you say, slow baby step, one day at a time. I think that's the part, that's really the message of nourishing and decaying. Accepting life comes, death comes, but the most beautiful part about it is not the death or the life, but it's the transformation through metabolic rate. But that rate really needs to be respected. And the biggest problem with sort of the biohacking protocols is saying you could get it fast. You could, you could heal instantly. You could become a coach in 3 months. You could become an expert. The food is ready for you. The package arrives in 2 days, 2 hours.
Right.
Yeah, I think the main ingredient is really the time. I think it's the rhythm. And once you're in the right rhythm, you really don't have to consume, or you don't really have to clean so much, because body is self-regulating. I think that's where the silence and space is what I mean. Is how much are you allowing God and nature to do, let it be? Because as you said about technology, we always feel like we have to produce something. But we don't have to produce anything. We have to be a conduit. And that's the most challenging part. So that's why we constantly feel like we need to innovate.
I love that you went back to just the silence, because understanding this process in ourselves, trying to speed things up, trying to slow things down, it does go back to the silence and listening and to letting things be, which is very hard for us, many of us to do. But I think that the times in life where I've been the most at peace is when I let things be. And I may have a focus, I may have things that I want to work on, but it's like, you can't rush this. You just have to let it play out, because I don't view God as, moving us in this chessboard. I believe that we're allowed to make these decisions and movements, and then He's there with grace to help us get through it. Without that grace, we wouldn't be able to move through it. But I feel that it is that silence that allows us to find our balance, that allows us to find and just be, and let things unfold. Can't If we try to manipulate that, it just doesn't work.
No, it doesn't.
Or we get really frustrated and then we create more problems. So,
Absolutely.
is there anything in closing that you'd like to share, to just any last words or comments that
When I was thinking about this podcast, I was, this is my 9th year going into being a chiropractor. So it's almost 2 decades. And I think I really resonate with, was it Plato or Socrates saying, the only thing I know is I know nothing. I think I'm definitely starting to resonate with that. So I think that's why sometimes I don't want to do the interviews, because sometimes I become very passionate about certain things and I want to make sure it's a knowledge. It's not this instant food or the trends and the latest cutting edge technology or the diet. And the next year people forget about it. I think the most beautiful quality in human being is our commitment to truth. Science is really pursuing facts, but as soon as there's more detail and sophisticated theory comes in, that fact could be modified, and then that's how it evolves. But science is a beautiful process, but we have to remember science is a tool, but truth is self-evident. Truth does not need evidence-based science, and truth is true for everybody, like love, like gravity, right? And I think that's the most beautiful quality of being human. And I think that's the only thing that I really want to base my talk on, because everything else becomes just more details that may go with the season. So I feel just very grateful. I have very different energy in this conversation than other podcasts and interviews or talks that I do. As I mentioned, it was very clear that you were such a heart center and genuine and God-loving person. So today I really felt like I felt purposeful. I feel very present. So I just want to share my gratitude with you and for the audience who is listening to us, is to have this sort of conversation. What we talk about, holding space and just connecting with people. You'll be surprised. That's when radical healing happens. I want people to remember that deep connection of being heard and having conversation that you really resonate with is how you're going to solve problems. Practicality is definitely important. So it's not either or, it's not black and white. But the more we start to practice authenticity, I think this sort of positive movement is way more powerful. Will have way more powerful ripple effect to changing the model that we're living in today than just focusing on all the negatives and degradation of humanity, which where I was, being a practitioner, toxicity, environmental toxins, but that just sort of, it's more of inflammatory information. It's there, but when you pour more positive, slowly they dissolve away, they get diluted, and love takes over.
I love that. Thank you so much. I've so much enjoyed the conversation. I was looking forward to the conversation because, I mean, as what you said, real conversation, meaningful conversation, allowing ourselves to love, to be loved is so essential in our healing journey. And without it, I don't think we heal. So I don't think it's possible to heal without this thing. So thank you so much for coming on, and definitely want to have you back, because I do want to get into talking about water and sound, and you alluded to some of those, but definitely have to meet up again and do this again. But thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Randy.
Where, if people want to find you, where can they find you?
It's pretty easy. They're all the same. So Dr. Kathy Yeo. So there are two Y's, DRKATHY, another YEO .com. That's my main website. And it's the same handle for all my other social media on Instagram and Facebook.
Awesome. Do follow her because her content on there is just very grounding. Perspectives are amazing. And it does come back to this centered groundedness. And yeah, thank you for who you are.
Thank you, Dr. Randy.
Till next time.
Yes.